Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, you flew first class from New York to San Francisco last month, 2,900 miles, to speak at a climate conference about the urgent need to ban private jets and reduce air travel. Can you explain that? The voice asking the question had a slight Louisiana drawl. Calm, almost gentle. Speaker of the House. Mike Johnson stood near the back of the auditorium holding a tablet in one hand. She didn't answer. Not right away. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was staring at the tablet he'd just placed on the table at the front of the stage. Even from 20 rows back, you could see it clearly on the projection screen behind her, her American Express statement. A charge for $1.427. Continental Airlines Flight 1847. JFK to SFO, first class, highlighted in yellow. 1,500 students and faculty sat frozen in the Georgetown University auditorium. They'd come for a climate leadership forum. They'd come to hear AOC talk about the Green New Deal, about climate justice, about how young people were going to save the planet. They'd lined up since 4 in the afternoon to get good seats. They'd been chanting her name when she walked in. They hadn't expected the Speaker of the House to show up with receipts. Literally. That's a privacy violation. AOC's voice had that defensive edge already. How did you even get my credit card? Public congressional financial disclosures. Johnson said, his tone still conversational. You disclosed it yourself, ma'am, as required by law. I'm just reading what you filed with the House Ethics Committee. He reached into the folder he was carrying and pulled out another document. This one was thicker, stapled, official-looking with federal letterhead. Your Tesla, the Model S you purchased last year. Beautiful car. I've driven one myself. They're fast. You paid $89,000 for it. Do you know where Tesla sources the lithium for those batteries? A long pause. The auditorium was so quiet, you could hear the ventilation system humming. I'm not going to sit here and be interrogated about my personal child labor mines in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Johnson continued, his voice maddeningly calm. Cobalt extracted by children as young as 6 years old, working in conditions that would be illegal anywhere in America, carrying rocks, breathing toxic dust for about $1 a day. Your car, the one you drive to climate, rallies the one you've posted photos of yourself in, was built on child slavery. Did you know that when you bought it? The room went dead silent. These were her people. Climate activists, Sunrise Movement members, Democratic Socialists of America, progressive students who'd skipped class to be here. They'd come to be inspired. They weren't expecting this. A young woman near the front, maybe 19, raised her hand tentatively. Is that true? About the children. AOC stood up suddenly. Her chair scraped against the stage floor, the sound harsh through the microphone system. This is ambush journalism. This is your voting record, your financial disclosures, and your public statements, Johnson said. He still hadn't raised his voice. All I'm doing is asking if you live by the standards you demand from everyone else. She was already moving. Not running, but walking fast toward the side exit. Her heels clicked on the stage floor. She left her notes on the podium, left her water bottle, left the microphone hot so everyone could hear every step until the door closed behind her. Johnson stood there for a moment, looking at the empty stage. Then he turned to the stunned audience. I have 30 more pages of disclosures if anyone wants to see them. Silence. Then from somewhere in the middle rows, a male student's voice. Yes. Show us. Heath. And that's when it got really bad for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But to understand how we got here, how the progressive movement's brightest star imploded in a Georgetown auditorium on a Tuesday night, you need to go back 2 hours earlier. When she walked into that building thinking this was going to be another triumph, Tuesday afternoon, January 13th, 2026. Georgetown University's Gaston Hall, a neo-Gothic auditorium that looked like it belonged in Harry Potter. The Climate Leadership Forum had been in the works for months. 3 student organizations had pooled resources to make it happen: the Georgetown chapter of the Sunrise Movement, the Democratic Socialists of America Student Group, and the Climate Justice Coalition. The promotional posters were everywhere on campus. They showed AOC in that iconic pose from her first campaign, arms crossed in tense stare, the kind of look that said she wasn't here to play nice. The text read, "A green new future is possible," in bold green letters. Below that, "An evening with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez." Tickets had sold out in under 3 hours when they'd gone live 2 weeks earlier. The auditorium held 1,500 people. They could have filled it 3 times over. By 6 p.m., students were lined up around the block. The energy was electric. These were true believers, kids who'd gotten into activism because of her, who'd knocked on doors in 2022 and 2024 because she'd inspired them, who genuinely believed that democratic socialism could save America and the planet. Inside, the organizers were doing last-minute tech checks, testing microphones, adjusting lights. A student named Maya Chen, president of the Sunrise chapter, was backstage going over the run of show for the 20th time. "She speaks for 45 minutes, Maya said to her co-organizers. "Then we do Q&A for 30. Then a reception in the side room for donors and student leaders." "Is the live stream working?" someone asked. "Yeah, we've got 3 cameras. This is going to be huge for our social media." They had no idea how right they were, just not in the way they expected. In the backstage dressing room, AOC was with her team. There were 5 of them, crammed into a space meant for 2, her communications director, Marcus Valdez, her press secretary, Jen Fitzgerald, 2 legislative aides, and her boyfriend, Riley Roberts. They'd flown down from New York that afternoon. Coach, actually, on this flight. The irony would become apparent soon enough. "Okay, talking points," Marcus said, flipping through note cards. "Hit the urgency we have less than a decade to prevent catastrophic warming. Hit the justice angle marginalized communities suffer first and worst. Hit the jobs narrative Green New Deal means millions of good-paying union jobs." AOC was checking her makeup in the mirror, adjusting her hoop earrings. She wore a forest green blazer over a white shirt. Professional, but approachable. She'd done this hundreds of times by now. Cable news, late-night shows, college campuses, union halls. She knew how to work a room. "What about a tax?" one of the aides asked. "If someone challenges the cost, I pivot to what inaction costs," AOC said, without looking away from the mirror. "We can't afford not to act. The fossil fuel industry has externalized the cost of climate destruction for decades. It's time to internalize it." "Perfect," Jen said. "You've got this." "I always do," AOC said, and she smiled, confident. This was her crowd, her people. Georgetown students were basically her demographic, young, educated, progressive, idealistic. This was going to be easy. "One thing," Marcus said, looking at his phone, "Mike Johnson just RSVP'd." AOC turned around. "What the speaker, why? University policy. Any elected official can request to attend." He asked if he could sit in the audience and maybe ask a question during Q&A. AOC exchanged glances with her team. Riley spoke up. "Is that normal?" "It's weird," Marcus admitted. "But we can't really say no. And honestly, it might play in our favor. If he asks some Republican gotcha question, you shut it down, crowd boos him, we get a viral clip of you owning the speaker. Could be good content. AOC nodded slowly. Okay, fine. Let him come. Let him embarrass himself in front of 1,500 progressives. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that Mike Johnson had spent the past 3 weeks preparing for this moment. Not with policy papers, not with economic models, with her receipts. 3 weeks earlier, Johnson's chief of staff, Tom Emmer, had walked into the speaker's office with a thick folder. "Sir, you wanted me to pull AOC's financial disclosures." Johnson looked up from the budget proposal he'd been reading. "Everything since she took office. Everything public. Financial disclosures, FEC filings, credit card statements. She's required to report property records. The works." Tom dropped the folder on the desk. It was 3 inches thick. "There's a lot here." Johnson opened it, started reading, and within 5 minutes, he was taking notes. "Her Tesla," he said. $89,000. "When did she buy that?" Tom flipped through his notes. "March 2025. Paid cash according to the disclosure." "Cash," Johnson repeated. "How much was she worth when she took office?" "Basically nothing. Under 10,000 in assets. She was a bartender. And now, north of $1 million. Maybe closer to 1.2. Johnson leaned back in his chair. He was a lawyer before he was a politician. He knew how to build cases. And what he was seeing in these disclosures was a case that built itself. Get me everything she said about luxury cars, about flying, about consumption, every public statement, every interview, every tweet. "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" Tom asked. "I'm thinking she's built a career telling people to sacrifice, to consume less, to give up comfort for the planet. And I want to see if she's making those sacrifices herself." It took 2 weeks to compile everything. The result was a document that laid out side by side what AOC said versus what AOC did. The rhetoric versus the reality. And the gap was enormous. When Johnson saw that Georgetown was hosting a climate event with AOC, he smiled. "Request an invitation," he told Tom. "Tell them the speaker would like to attend and ask a few questions. They'll let you. University policy. They have to. And I want to do this in front of her people. Not on Fox News. Not in a congressional hearing. In front of the students who believe in her. Let them see who she really is." Now at 6:45 p.m., Johnson arrived at Gaston Hall through a side entrance. He had 2 staffers with him and his security detail. He was dressed in a simple navy suit, no tie. Understated. He didn't want this to be about him. He wanted it to be about her. The student organizers looked nervous when they saw him. Maya approached cautiously. "Speaker Johnson. We weren't sure you'd actually come." "Wouldn't miss it," Johnson said pleasantly. "Where should I sit?" We can put you in the front row." "Back is fine," Johnson said. "I'm just here to listen. And maybe ask a question if there's time." He took a seat in the back left section. Row 20. He had his folder, the 3 inches of documents distilled down to 30 key pages. Financial disclosures, quotes, photos, all cross-referenced, all documented, all public record. He sat quietly as the auditorium filled up, watched the students file in excited, energetic, wearing their Sunrise Movement shirts and Bernie Sanders pins. They had no idea what was about to happen. At 7 p.m. sharp, the lights dimmed. Maya walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Tonight we have the honor of hosting one of the most courageous, most visionary leaders in American politics. Please welcome Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez." The place erupted. Standing ovation before she even appeared. Chants of AOC, AOC, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. And then she walked out from stage, right waving, smiling that million-watt smile. She looked genuinely happy. This was her element. These were her people. She could feel the love in the room. She took the microphone from Maya and waited for the cheering to die down. "Wow," she said, laughing. "Thank you. Thank you so much. It's so good to be here at Georgetown with all of you." More cheers. "You know, when I was bartending in the Bronx just a few years ago, I never imagined I'd be standing in front of brilliant young people like you, talking about how we're going to save our planet and build a better future. But here we are. And I'm here because of you. Because young people refused to accept that climate catastrophe was inevitable. Because you organized. Because you voted. Because you demanded more." Applause. Snapping that progressive finger snap applause that sounds like rain. For the next 40 minutes, she was on fire. She talked about the science of climate change with the fluency of someone who'd been studying it for years. She talked about environmental racism, about how poor communities and communities of color bore the brunt of pollution and extreme weather. She talked about the Green New Deal not as a wish list, but as a necessity, as the only viable path forward. "We're told we can't afford it," she said, her voice rising with passion. "But we can't afford not to do it. Every year we delay costs us more. In money, yes, but more importantly, in lives, in futures, in the habitability of our planet." The audience was enraptured. Students were taking notes, filming on their phones. This was the AOC they'd come to see, the fighter, the visionary, the one who told them a better world was possible. "And here's what the fossil fuel industry doesn't want you to know," she continued. "This isn't about individual choices. It's about systemic change. Yes, we all need to do our part, but we can't recycle our way out of climate catastrophe. We need to transform our economy. We need to hold corporations accountable. We need to prioritize people and planet over profit." More applause, more snapping. The wealthy, and I mean the really wealthy, the billionaire class, they're the ones driving consumption. Private jets, yachts, mansions that use more energy in a month than a working family uses in a year. They're the ones who need to sacrifice, not working people who are just trying to survive. She was building to her conclusion. So, when people ask me, "Is the Green New Deal realistic?" I say what's realistic is that we have about 8 years to cut emissions in half or face irreversible warming. What's realistic is that we have the technology, the resources, and the will to do this. The only question is whether we have the courage. And looking at all of you, I know we do. Standing ovation. The entire auditorium on its feet. She stood there soaking it in smiling waving. This was going exactly as planned. "Okay," she said when people finally sat down. "I think we have time for some questions. Let's hear from you all." Maya stepped forward with a microphone to take questions from the audience. Hands shot up everywhere. Maya pointed to a young woman in the third row. "Hi, Congresswoman. Thank you so much for being here. My question is about—" "Excuse me?" a voice called from the back. "I have a question first, if that's okay." Everyone turned. Mike Johnson was standing, row 20 back left. The energy in the room changed instantly. Some boos, some confused murmurs. AOC's smile faltered just slightly. Maya looked uncertain. "Speaker Johnson, we usually take questions from students first." "I understand," Johnson said pleasantly. "But I did RSVP specifically to ask the Congresswoman a few questions. University policy says elected officials can participate. I'll be brief, I promise. Maya looked at AOC. AOC nodded tightly. It's fine. Let him ask. Johnson smiled. Thank you, Congresswoman. I really did enjoy your talk. Very passionate. I want to ask about implementation. Implementation, AOC said carefully. Yes, ma'am. You've talked a lot tonight about sacrifice, about how the wealthy need to change their consumption patterns, about how we all need to do our part for the climate. I'm curious how you're implementing those principles in your own life. Can we talk about that? And that's when the temperature in the room changed, because suddenly this wasn't about policy. This was about her. AOC shifted her weight slightly, her expression guarded. I try to live consistently with my values. Yes. I'm glad to hear that, Johnson said. He was still standing in the back, speaking clearly, so his voice carried. Because you mentioned private jets, you said they should be banned, that even commercial air travel needs to be dramatically reduced. I think your exact words were, he pulled out his phone and read from it. No one needs to fly cross-country for a vacation. That's a luxury we can't afford anymore. Do you remember saying that, in the context of the climate emergency, we need to reduce unnecessary air travel? Yes. So I'm curious about your trip to San Francisco last month, December 14th. You flew from New York to speak at a climate conference. That's 2,900 miles each way. There's a train Amtrak takes about 3 days. Much lower emissions. Why didn't you take the train? There was a pause. You could feel the audience starting to pay attention in a different way. This wasn't abstract policy anymore. I have congressional obligations. I can't spend 6 days traveling. But the conference was Friday through Sunday. You flew out Thursday night, flew back Monday morning. So you had Thursday to fly out Monday to fly back. You could have left Tuesday, arrived Friday, been there for the conference, then left Sunday evening and been back Wednesday. That's 6 days, but you had them. You chose not to use them. Why, AOC's voice took on an edge. I think we need to be practical about. I agree completely. Practical. So you flew. But you didn't just fly. You flew first class. Johnson held up his tablet. Even from the back of the room, people could see it. The projection screen behind AOC showed her American Express statement. Continental Flight 1847. JFK to SFO. Date December 14th. Amount $1,427. First class costs $1,400. Coach on that same flight was $340. You spent an extra $1,000 taxpayer money since you expensed it through your congressional office for extra legroom and free champagne. On a flight, you say people shouldn't be taking at all. Can you explain that? The room was dead quiet now. Students were looking at each other, looking at the screen, looking at AOC. How did you get my credit card statement? Her voice was sharp now. That's a privacy. Public congressional financial disclosure, Johnson said calmly. You filed it yourself with the House Ethics Committee as required by the Ethics in Government Act of 1978. It's public record. Anyone can request it. I didn't hack anything. I didn't violate anything. I just read what you disclosed. He reached into his folder and pulled out a thick, stapled document. In fact, I have all your disclosures right here. In the past 18 months, you've taken 42 flights. 42. 28 of them were first class or business class. The remainder were coach, but mostly short flights, where first class isn't available. He looked up from the document. 42 flights in 18 months, while telling Americans that flying is destroying the planet. 28 of those in first class, while telling working people they consume too much. Can you help me understand that AOC's jaw was tight? Those were for congressional business. Some were, Johnson acknowledged. The San Francisco Climate Conference, I'll grant you, that's congressional business. But what about Miami in December? You posted Instagram photos from South Beach. Much needed break, you wrote. You flew. Why not drive? It's a 29-hour drive from New York to Miami. Long, yes. But you're asking coal miners in West Virginia to sacrifice their jobs. You're asking farmers to sacrifice their livelihoods. You're asking working families to pay higher energy costs. But you're not willing to sacrifice a comfortable flight for a beach vacation. A male student near the front spoke up, his voice defensive. She has a right to take a vacation. Johnson turned to him. Absolutely. I agree 100%. I'm not saying she can't vacation. I'm asking why she gets to fly to Miami for vacation while telling everyone else that flying for leisure is destroying the planet. Either it's destroying the planet or it's not. If it is, she should drive or take the train. If it's not, she should stop saying it is. You can't have it both ways. The logic was brutal in its simplicity. And you could see it landing. Students were frowning, processing. Some were nodding slowly. AOC tried to regain control. This is a gotcha. No, ma'am. A gotcha is a trick question based on twisting your words. This is your financial disclosure compared to your public statements. Your actions compared to your rhetoric. There's no trick. These are flights you took. These are things you said. I'm just asking if they're consistent. Johnson didn't wait for her response. He was building momentum now like a prosecutor in closing arguments. Let's talk about your car. You drive a Tesla Model S, correct? Yes, AOC said warily. Beautiful car. I test drove one once. They're incredibly fast. You paid $89,000 for it. That's according to your financial disclosure from March 2025. Do you remember what you said about luxury cars 2 years ago? He pulled out his phone again, scrolled, found what he was looking for. This is from your appearance on Pod Save America in June 2023. You said, and I quote, "No one needs a car that costs more than $50,000. Luxury cars are climate crimes. They're wealth hoarding on wheels. They're status symbols that kill the planet." End quote. Do you remember saying that? Silence. So, my question is simple. If luxury cars are climate crimes, why do you drive one? Tesla is electric. AOC started. I know it's electric. Electric is better for emissions during operation, no question. But let's talk about how that car gets made. Do you know where Tesla sources the lithium for those batteries? More silence. Lithium mines in the Atacama Desert, in Chile, in Argentina, and in Australia. The extraction process uses enormous amounts of water, about 500,000 gallons per ton of lithium, in drought-prone regions. And it leaves behind toxic waste that contaminates groundwater. He paused. But lithium isn't the biggest problem. The real issue is cobalt. Your Tesla has about 22 pounds of cobalt in its battery. Do you know where most of the world's cobalt comes from? AOC didn't answer. The Democratic Republic of Congo. About 70% of global cobalt supply. And do you know how that cobalt is extracted? He looked down at his phone, reading from it. A 2019 Amnesty International report titled "This is What We Die For" documented the conditions. Open pit mines. Many of them artisanal, which is a polite way of saying unregulated and dangerous. The report found that approximately 40,000 children work in these cobalt mines, some as young as 6 years old. They work 10 to 12-hour days, carrying sacks of rocks that weigh more than they do, breathing toxic dust that causes permanent lung damage for about $1 a day. The auditorium was completely silent now. This was different from the flights. This was about child exploitation, and these students, these were people who cared deeply about labor rights, about global justice, about human dignity. Johnson looked up from his phone directly at AOC. Your car, the Tesla Model S that you drive around Washington, that you've posted photos of yourself in front of that you called My Baby on Instagram last spring, has a battery built with cobalt that was very likely extracted by child labor. When you bought that $89,000 car, did you know about the children in the Congo? AOC's face was flushed. All cars require resource extraction. True, Johnson said. But you could have bought a used car. You could have bought a much cheaper electric vehicle. A Nissan Leaf costs $30,000 and has a smaller battery, less cobalt. You could have taken public transportation. DC has an excellent metro system. You could have done what you tell poor people to do. Make do with less. Make sacrifices. Prioritize the planet over convenience. But instead, you bought an $89,000 luxury vehicle that required child labor in Africa, while telling working-class Americans that driving SUVs makes them complicit in climate destruction. He let that sit for a moment. Ma'am, is it a climate crime, or isn't it? Because if luxury cars are climate crimes, why do you get to drive one? And if they're not, why do you say they are? A young woman in the audience, maybe 20 years old, spoke up. Her voice was shaky. Is that true? About the children? Johnson nodded. Amnesty International, 2019. I can give you the full citation. The report is called This is What We Die for Human Rights Abuses in the Democratic Republic of Congo Power, the Global Trade in Cobalt. It's about 70 pages. Very well documented. You could hear people pulling out their phones, Googling, checking. The rustling of verification happening in real time. AOC tried to pivot. I'm not going to stand here and be lectured about ethics by someone who voted against. I voted for H.R. 4358, the Child Labor Deterrence Act. Johnson interrupted. You voted against it because you said it didn't go far enough, that it needed stronger provisions. But while you were voting against it for not being pure enough, you were driving a car built with the very child labor the bill tried to address. That's not a lecture, Congresswoman. That's just a fact. Johnson flipped to another page in his folder. Let's talk about the Met Gala. September 2021. You wore that dress white, with Tax the Rich, written in red on the back. I remember it. Everyone remembers it. Very bold statement. AOC's expression shifted slightly. This felt like safer ground. The Met Gala dress had been celebrated. I was using fashion as protest. How much did that dress cost? Pause. It was loaned to me by the designer Aurora James. I didn't pay, but she had to make it. Custom dress hand-sewn for you specifically. Do you know what the materials and labor cost? I didn't pay for it. About $35,000. That's what reporters estimated based on similar custom pieces. Hand-sewn message luxury fabric, custom-fitted. $35,000 for a dress you wore for about 4 hours. He pulled out another sheet. Do you know what the median household income is in your district, the Bronx and Queens communities you represent? He looked at the paper. $56,300 per year. The median family in your district makes $56,000 a year. The dress you wore to protest wealth inequality cost 2/3 of their annual income. For one night. That landed differently. Because everyone in this room, students with debt-working side jobs worried about rent, could do the math. $35,000. Most of them didn't have that much money total. But you didn't pay for it, a student called out, trying to defend her. No, Johnson agreed. She didn't. A wealthy designer gave it to her. Which raises the question, why does a wealthy designer give $35,000 worth of custom fashion to a congresswoman? What does the designer get in return? Access influence, the social capital of having AOC wear her design. He turned back to AOC. But let's set that aside. The deeper question is this. You wore a tax the rich message to an event where tickets cost $30,000 each. You were inside. You were a guest. You were part of it. You can't protest wealth from inside the castle while wearing a $35,000 dress. That's not protest. That's performance. AOC's voice rose. I was using my platform to do what? To tell rich people they're bad while attending their party, while being photographed with billionaires, while eating food prepared by workers, making minimum wage, who weren't allowed to make eye contact with the guests. He leaned forward slightly. Congresswoman, there were actual protesters outside the Met Gala that night. Climate activists who weren't allowed in. They were on the street in the cold holding signs. You could have stood with them. You could have protested from outside. But you went in. You got your hair done, put on a $35,000 dress, and partied with celebrities and billionaires. That's not fighting the system. That's joining it. You rent an apartment in Navy Yard, Johnson continued. He was methodical, now relentless. Nice neighborhood in D.C. One bedroom, about 750 square feet. Your rent is $2,800 per month. That's $33,600 per year. D.C. is expensive. I know, I live here too. But you've said repeatedly, and I have the quotes, that no one should have to pay more than 30% of their income on housing. That's been one of your core policy positions. You make $174,000 per year as a member of Congress. 30% of that would be $52,200. Your rent of $33,600 is only 19%, so actually you're well under the threshold. He paused. Except your rent isn't your only housing cost. You also own a condominium in the Bronx. Your grandmother's old place, which you bought from the estate in 2023. You pay a mortgage on it, property taxes, HOA fees. According to your financial disclosure, those total about $2,200 per month, another $26,400 per year. He did the math out loud. So your total housing costs are about $60,000 per year. That's 34% of your congressional salary. You're spending more than the threshold you say no one should have to exceed. Why do you need two homes? It was a clever attack. Not accusing her of being rich, accusing her of not following her own rule. I need to maintain residency in my district. You could rent in the Bronx. There are studios in your district for $1,500 per month. Combined with your D.C. rent of $2,800, that would be $40,300 per month, about $52,000 per year, exactly 30% of your income. But you choose to own, to pay mortgage interest and HOA fees, to spend extra. That's your choice. But why do you get to make that choice while saying working families shouldn't have housing options that exceed 30% of income? AOC stood up from her chair. This is ridiculous. You're nitpicking every single detail. I'm comparing your life to your rhetoric, Johnson said, still calm. You've built a career on telling people they consume too much, that they need to sacrifice, that the comfortable life they want is destroying the planet. But when I look at how you actually live first-class flights, an $89,000 car, $35,000 dresses, two homes that put you above your own threshold, you're not making those sacrifices. You're living like every other comfortable member of Congress. He paused. And there's nothing wrong with that. You've earned your salary. You have a right to spend it. But there is something deeply wrong with demanding sacrifices from working people that you won't make yourself. With telling coal miners to accept unemployment while you fly first class to climate conferences. With saying luxury cars are crimes while driving one built by child labor. Johnson pulled out one more document. This one had the official seal of the Federal Election Commission at the top. One last thing. Let's talk about your campaign finances. AOC's team, sitting in the front row, visibly tensed. These are your campaign finance reports, filed with the FEC, public record. He flipped through the pages. In the 2022 election cycle, your campaign spent $212,000 on payments to a company called AOC Strategies. That's SAOIRSE. It means freedom in Irish. Do you know who owns AOC Strategies? Silence. Your boyfriend, Riley Roberts. Johnson gestured to the front row where Riley was sitting. Riley's face went pale. He owns it. It's his company. You paid your boyfriend's company $212,000 in campaign funds for consulting services. What did he consult on? That's completely legal, AOC started. I didn't say it was illegal. I'm asking what services his company provided that justified $212,000. Campaign strategy, digital outreach. Your campaign also employs a full-time communications director, a digital director, and 3 organizing consultants. What did your boyfriend's company do that your paid staff didn't do? He didn't wait for an answer. You also paid $180,000 to a company called Blue Horizon Media. Do you know who owns Blue Horizon Media? Your former chief of staff. So you paid your boyfriend's company $212,000 and your former chief of staff's company $180,000. That's $392,000 in campaign funds to people you're personally close to. An older man in the audience faculty, by his appearance, spoke up. Those payments are disclosed. They're legal. Johnson turned to him. They're disclosed because the law requires it. And legal doesn't necessarily mean ethical. Let me ask you something, Professor. If a Republican member of Congress paid their spouse's company $200,000 in campaign funds, would you think that was okay? Or would you call it corruption? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. Johnson turned back to AOC. You've built your entire brand on being different, on being pure, on not being like the corrupt corporate Democrats or the bought and paid for Republicans. I don't take corporate PAC money, you say. I'm funded by working people. And that's true. You raised $17 million last cycle in small donations, average contribution of $27. He held up the FEC report. But what you don't tell those donors is that nearly $400,000 of their money from teachers and nurses and bartenders giving $27 at a time went to your boyfriend's company and your former staffer's company for vaguely defined consulting. That's not people power, Congresswoman. That's a grift. The room erupted, not in applause, in arguments, students debating each other, some defending AOC, some looking genuinely disturbed. The energy had completely changed. Johnson raised his voice slightly to be heard. You're not different. You're just younger and better at Instagram. But the game is the same. Tell the people you're fighting for them. Collect their money. Spend it on yourself and your friends. That's not democratic socialism. That's the same old corruption with better branding. AOC's voice was shaking now, either with anger or panic or both. This is coordinated character assassination. These are your financial disclosures, Johnson said. Your FEC reports, your public statements. All I did was read them and ask questions. A young woman stood up. Row 7, left side. She had green hair and wore a Sunrise Movement shirt. Congresswoman. Her voice was trembling. Is it true about the child labor in the cobalt mines? AOC turned to look at her. This was supposed to be her audience, her people. It's more complicated than he's making it sound. Is it true, yes or no? The young woman's voice was stronger now. Are children mining cobalt for Tesla batteries? Long pause. The entire room was waiting. The supply chain for electric vehicles involves mineral extraction that, in some cases in certain countries, labor standards aren't what we— That's a yes, the young woman said. Her voice broke. You drive a car built by children, while telling us we're destroying the planet by driving our parents' old Hondas. She sat down, but others were standing now. A young man, maybe 22. What about the boyfriend's company? Did you pay him $212,000 of donor money? My campaign paid for legitimate consulting services. That's not what he asked, another student interrupted. Did you pay your boyfriend's company money that people donated to your campaign? The payments were for services rendered. An older woman stood, faculty member probably. I donated to your campaign. I gave $27 a month for 18 months. That's almost $500. Did my money go to pay your boyfriend for consulting? The questions were coming faster now. The room was turning. Not all of it there were still defenders, still true believers, who thought this was all a right-wing smear. But the cracks were showing. Doubt was spreading. How many flights did you say? 42. Why do you need 2 apartments? Did you know about the cobalt when you bought the Tesla? AOC looked around the room, at faces that had been adoring 90 minutes ago, and now looked confused, disappointed, betrayed. She looked at her team in the front row. Marcus was frantically typing on his phone. Jen looked stricken. Riley was staring at his shoes. She turned back to Johnson. You came here to humiliate me. Johnson's voice was quiet. I came here to ask questions. You could have answered them honestly. You could have said, yes, I flew first class, and that was a mistake. You could have said, yes, I drive a luxury car, and I should have researched the supply chain better. You could have said, yes, I paid my boyfriend's company, and in hindsight, that looks bad, and I'll change that. You could have owned it. He paused. But instead, you're defending it, while still telling working people they consume too much, while still saying others need to sacrifice. That's what I came here to expose, not you personally. The hypocrisy. AOC started gathering her things, her phone, her notes, her water bottle. Her hands were shaking slightly. Maya, the student organizer, rushed onto the stage. Congresswoman, we still have 30 minutes scheduled. I'm not doing this, AOC said. Her voice was tight. This was supposed to be a forum about climate solutions, not an ambush. It's only an ambush if you can't answer the questions, Johnson called from the back. She shot him a look that could melt steel. Then she walked, not running, but moving fast. Her heels clicked on the wooden stage floor, click, click, click loud in the suddenly quiet auditorium. She reached the side exit, pushed through the door, and was gone. The door closed behind her with a heavy thud that echoed. The audience sat in stunned silence. The projection screen behind the stage still showed her credit card statement frozen on display. 1,500 people didn't know what to do. Johnson stood up. I have 30 more pages of her disclosures here. Does anyone want to see them? Or should we call it a night? For a moment, nothing. Then a student near the front, show us. Another voice, yeah, we want to see. Show us everything. And that's when it got really bad for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Because Mike Johnson spent the next 45 minutes going through the rest of her financial disclosures. Her speaking fees $40,000 per appearance at some corporate events. Her book deal advance of $350,000. Brand partnerships she'd done. Investments she'd made. The students didn't leave. They stayed. They listened. They asked questions. They took notes. And with each new revelation, you could see the cognitive dissonance resolving itself. The woman they'd believed in, the champion of the working class, lived like the elite she claimed to fight against. Not all of them turned. Some remained loyal, convinced this was all a hit job. But many others, maybe half the room, left with questions they couldn't answer. Why does she get to fly first class? Why does she drive a car built by child labor? Why did my $27 donation pay her boyfriend? By the time Johnson finished, it was almost 9 p.m. About half the audience had trickled out. The energy was gone. What had started as a celebration had turned into an autopsy. Johnson gathered his papers, thanked the remaining students for their time, and left through a side exit. The footage was everywhere within an hour. Not from CNN or MSNBC, from the students themselves. They'd been filming on their phones, multiple angles, different perspectives, and they uploaded everything. The clip that went most viral wasn't even AOC walking out. It was a 19-second moment. Johnson, did you know about the child labor in the cobalt mines when you bought the Tesla AOC? Long pause. The supply chain is complicated. Student, that's a yes. You knew. That clip got 20 million views in the first 12 hours. The second most viral clip was the boyfriend's company question. The moment Johnson said $212,000 to your boyfriend's company, and the camera caught Riley's face going pale. Twitter exploded, but not the way AOC's team expected. Yes, conservatives were sharing the clips gleefully. AOC exposed as fraud. The socialist drives a child labor car. Predictable stuff. But what really hurt was the progressive accounts, the left-wing activists who'd defended her for years. I've knocked doors for AOC. I've donated. I've defended her against every attack. But paying your boyfriend $200K in campaign funds, that's not what I signed up for. 127,000 likes. The child labor thing is bothering me. Like really bothering me. We can't claim to care about global justice and then drive cars built by 6-year-olds. 89,000 likes. I don't think AOC is evil. I think she got comfortable. And that's exactly what we were afraid would happen. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. 156,000 likes. The Democratic Socialists of America issued a statement. It was careful, lawyerly. We believe all elected officials, including our allies, should be held accountable to the values they espouse. We encourage self-reflection and course correction. Translation, we're not defending this. The Sunrise Movement was more direct. Their national Twitter account posted, "Climate justice means justice for everyone, including children in Congo cobalt mines. No exceptions, not for anyone." They didn't mention AOC by name. They didn't have to. By Friday morning, the New York Times had a piece, "Ocasio-Cortez faces questions about lifestyle and campaign spending." The article was balanced, factual, and devastating. It laid out everything Johnson had presented, verified it against public records, and asked the obvious question, how can you demand sacrifice from others while not sacrificing yourself? AOC's office released a statement Friday afternoon. It was 2 pages long. It called Johnson's questions bad faith attacks designed to distract from his party's climate denialism. It said the FEC filings were completely legal and properly disclosed. It defended the Tesla as a necessary investment in reducing my personal carbon footprint. It said the campaign payments to Sarsa Strategies were for legitimate consulting services rendered. What the statement didn't do was address the central question, why do you get to live comfortably while telling working people to sacrifice? The polls came Monday. An internal poll from her campaign leaked to Politico. Her favorability in her district had dropped 15 points, from 63% to 48% in less than a week. Among voters under 30, her core base, the young people who'd made her a political celebrity, the drop was even steeper. 22 points, from 71% favorable to 49%. The crosstabs were devastating. When asked, "Do you think AOC genuinely represents working-class interests?" the number dropped from 68% yes to 44% yes. When asked, "Do you think AOC lives by the values she promotes?" it dropped from 61% yes to 33% yes. That's the number that killed campaigns. 33%. Two-thirds of her own constituents no longer believed she practiced what she preached. 3 weeks later, a primary challenger announced. Her name was Maria Santos, 32 years old, high school teacher in the Bronx, made $68,000 a year, lived in a rent-stabilized apartment, rode the subway, had never flown first class in her life. Her announcement video opened with her standing outside a public school. "My name is Maria Santos. I'm a teacher. I live in the Bronx. I take the subway to work. I shop at the same bodegas as my neighbors. And when I say working people need to sacrifice for the climate, I make those sacrifices myself. That's the difference." The video had 3 million views in 24 hours. Her campaign slogan appeared on posters across the district within days: "She walks the walk." AOC tried to fight back. She did the media rounds. The View, Pod Save America, The Breakfast Club. She explained context. She defended her choices. She said she was being held to an impossible standard. But the damage was done. Because it wasn't Republicans who were attacking her. It was her own people. The progressives who'd believed in her, who felt betrayed, who felt like they'd been sold a lie. Mike Johnson, for his part, didn't gloat. He didn't do victory laps on Fox News. 3 days after the Georgetown event, his office released a one-sentence statement. "If you're going to ask Americans to make sacrifices for the climate, for social justice, for any cause, you should be willing to make those sacrifices yourself. That's not partisan politics. That's basic integrity." It was hard to argue with that. By March, AOC's lead in the primary polls had evaporated. She was tied with Maria Santos. By April, she was behind. By May, she was down 8 points. In June, she lost the primary. Not by a little. By 14 points. The largest defeat for an incumbent member of Congress in New York in modern history. Her concession speech was brief. She talked about fighting the good fight, about speaking truth to power, about how corporate interests and right-wing smear campaigns had aligned against her. She didn't mention the Tesla, or the first-class flights, or her boyfriend's consulting company, or the children in the cobalt mines. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe admitting the hypocrisy would have been too much. Maybe she genuinely believed she'd done nothing wrong, that she was being held to an unfair standard, that she deserved comfort, because she was fighting for justice. Or maybe, and this is what I think, what a lot of people came to think, maybe she'd just gotten comfortable. Maybe the bartender from the Bronx, who'd shocked the world, had become exactly what she'd run against. Another politician who said one thing and did another, who demanded sacrifice from others, but not from herself, who used donor money to enrich friends and family, who talked about the people while living like the elite. It wasn't Mike Johnson who destroyed Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's political career. It was the gap between her rhetoric and her reality. The distance between what she said and what she did. The contradiction between the image she'd built and the life she actually lived. Johnson just pointed it out, in front of 1,500 people who'd come to believe in her. And once they saw it, they couldn't unsee it. That's the thing about hypocrisy. It's not a policy disagreement you can debate. It's not a partisan attack you can dismiss. It's just the truth about who you really are versus who you claim to be. And once that truth is exposed, no amount of explaining can put the mask back on. 3 months after losing her primary AOC, took a job as a political commentator. Good pay, comfortable life. She gave speeches about climate justice and economic inequality. She still had millions of followers on social media. But she wasn't in Congress anymore. She wasn't making laws. She wasn't representing working people. She'd become exactly what she'd always criticized: someone who talks about revolution from a position of comfort. Someone who profits from progressive politics without living progressive values. The Green New Deal she'd championed, it never passed. Parts of it were absorbed into other bills, watered down, compromised away. But on a Tuesday night in a Georgetown auditorium, the movement she'd built learned an important lesson. If you're going to demand that others change their lives, you'd better be willing to change yours first. If you're going to call for sacrifice, you'd better be willing to sacrifice. If you're going to fight the system, you can't become part of it. It's a simple lesson. But apparently, it's one that even the most celebrated progressive of her generation couldn't learn. Or maybe she learned it just too late.